Hi, I'm Chase Green, and I will be showing you my block mesh of the Lich's Dungeon level. I have already created the sprites for the walls, the tiles, doors, chest, and minions, Lich, and player, as well as the animations for the Lich, player, your minions, chest, and doors. So we are right now in these level starts. The player will be able to choose to go left, right, or straight. The main path is to go straight, where the player will then be able to face, going into here, face their first challenge. We have a combat mechanic that is we call spawn rifts. The spawn rifts will spawn minions, the skeletons and figures we see up here, and the player will then have to destroy them. Destroying them, the player will be able to proceed further. And once all are defeated, the rift is closed. Going up, we'll see another red carpet before being introduced to the Lich. The Lich will also have another combat mechanic. This one will have 3 separate attacks that will create a circle AoE around the player. Here, one that would be a line that moves towards the player, another one that will spawn random circles around the map. After a short delay, a magical aura will strike down on where the attacks indicators are doing damage to the player if he's still in the attack warning. The player could come up and attack the Lich, and defeating the Lich, the player will then be able to proceed. But also during the fight, the Lich will be spawning minions. The first time he spawns his minions, he will spawn several minions that will be like a practice of the skeleton minion combat. The next time, and therefore after, will spawn a mastery difficult of the Lich's minions that the player will have to defeat. Defeating the Lich does not permanently kill him at this point. He will respawn and continue to harass the player if the player returns back to this room or goes towards the vault. So traveling to the vault, the player could go left or right, and traveling in here, the player will reach the main objective, which is the vault. The main objective is for the player to loot all these chests and get as much gold and treasure as they can before using a scroll of returning to leave. A scroll of returning is what the player uses to end the level, as well as what is used to respawn the player if the player is defeated in combat. The player is only able to ever hold 1 scroll of returning, but they do start with 1. The player can acquire more scrolls of returning by defeating the mini-boss, the phylactery, and each time they defeat the Lich. We're going to head back to the level start, and we're going to show the next path. The next path we are going to take is the left path. The left path will lead into the ballroom, or player could take a shortcut. The shortcut can skip one of the rooms and go straight to the lab, or back to the Lich's room. Traveling to the ballroom, this will be as well as a level introduction to combat. The player will have to defeat 3 skeletons that are spawned from the spawn rift. After doing this, it will introduce the chest mechanic, which will grant loot, but this mechanic is introduced, practiced, and mastered all at once. After all the skeletons in this room are defeated, the player can then go to the study. In the study, it will be the practicing of the combat. It will spawn 2 waves of 4 skeletons in a small, more compact area. The player will then have to defeat them. Of course, after defeating them, they will be able to acquire another chest. Traveling up to the lab will be the same as the last room. We'll spawn 2 waves of 4 skeletons for a second round of the practice. This is 2 rounds of practice just in case the player skipped the previous. The player is also then able to acquire the loot of the room. Once done, the player could enter the room of the phylactery. The phylactery is a side objective that the player can accomplish. The phylactery is what determines how fast the Lich respawns. The more damage done to the phylactery, the slower the Lich respawns, and destroying it significantly decreases the speed of the Lich's respawn. But doing damage to the phylactery will spawn rifts until it is destroyed or until the player has died. Once the phylactery is defeated and all rifts are closed, the player can loot the room with an increased chance of rare loot before going to the vault and looting it for the end of the level. But for the looting of the vault, the Lich will attempt to interfere and will start to pursue the player once the phylactery is destroyed. But of course, at a much slower spawn rate. Traveling down the secret path, or the shortcut, we're going to travel to the right. The right also has a shortcut, but if we go into the first room, we are going to have another practice level of 3 minions, a chest for the player to loot for another introduction of combat, before going into the kitchen. The kitchen will have 4 minions in a more compact area. This will spawn 4 minions in 2 waves for a practice of the combat. We are also going to start seeing the red trail of the color indicator, similar to how we found the Lich. This is indicating that this is the direction of the mini-boss. Next, we're entering the butcher's shop and holding cells, which will also be another practice of 4 minions in 2 waves. Traveling further ahead, we're going to have the mini-boss. The current large skeletal is a temporary placeholder for the block mesh of the mini-boss himself. The mini-boss will have slower and weaker attacks similar to the Lich, kind of like an introduction to the Lich's attacks. The mini-boss's main attacks will be at a much stronger rate of what the normal skeletons are for the mastery of combat. Once defeated, the player is then able to loot all the chests, and this room has the highest chance of stronger gear to defeat the Lich. Defeating the mini-boss is also the second side objective of the game. Completing this objective will decrease the attack speed and the power of the Lich. But also completing this room, the player may have a chance to have increased attack, which helps their chance to fight the Lich when he tries to hinder them when the player comes. When the player defeats the mini-boss, the Lich will travel down this path to attempt to hinder the player. Once completed, the player then gets to loot the vault. Our third and final objective is the permanent destruction of the Lich. This requires several steps and exploration of the entire level. The player will need to close all rifts of the level, defeat the phylactery or mini-boss, then travel and defeat the other one that they did. So they have now completed all paths, both side objectives, and then the player will need to defeat the Lich inside of the throne room to permanently kill him. Once the player has completed this objective, when the player heads to the vault, he will have nobody to hinder the looting and will instantly complete the level, guarantee max amount of loot and rewards from the vault. At the end of the level, the amount of loot and treasure collected will be calculated. The amount of damage done to the Lich, how many times defeated of the Lich, if the mini-boss or phylactery was destroyed. How many times the player has been defeated will all be recorded at the end of the level. Thank you for watching my block mesh of the Lich's Dungeon.